so their contention was that what you're always a cop, you're always on, and we agree on that. It's a nonstop thing. Now, you've been out of law enforcement for a while. I've been out for a little while. Would you say that it has changed much for you even today, or are you still very tactically minded? Are you still basically thinking and acting and doing everything like you did back in the day, or has it changed for you now?
It has changed for me, obviously, because I'm not doing the job anymore. I literally have to think more about what I'm doing as opposed to what came natural. And I realized for 33 years, a lot of it was natural. But I still have my head on the swivel. I'm cognizant of how I pull up to a stoplight, who's parked next to us, what's going on, driving down the road, at a restaurant, in the grocery store. Last week when we were down in Florida for family vacation, just having my head on a swivel and knowing where anyone and everyone was.
I think it's just that's the way it is. It's part of it. And I know of maybe one person right now that was ever in law enforcement who now wants to distance himself completely from it. But by and large, I'd say 99.9% of the people I know, they're just like us. And probably the people listening to us right now, if you're in law enforcement, if you're doing the job or considering doing the job, you just accept the fact that this is who you're going to be from now on. It's probably not going to change. So what else about that article kind of stood out to you?
They talk about police officers and, what they see from their shift from the beginning to the end. They see the dead bodies. They see the abused babies. They see the abused spouses. It just continues. And the vagaries of the job just have a wear and tear effect on all police officers in uniform, like we've spoken about, and out of uniform.
So it's true. When you're actually doing law enforcement work, you get into it for all the right reasons, but the sad reality is it's a nasty and bad world out there. There's a lot of bad stuff, and when you're a police officer, you're on the front lines of that. You see it all the time. And one thing that, kind of stands out to me is that a lot of people don't know is that when even a good medical call drops, if you've got somebody that's just injured themselves, sometimes it's very common for your line level patrol officer to get there before the medics even get there. So you get to see the very immediate after effects of some really heinous and nasty stuff sometimes. If you work traffic, of course, traffic accidents can be some of the most, heinous things you've ever seen before. If you work patrol, you're going to end up getting dispatched out to suicide calls, to all kinds of things. I remember early on, one of my very first call outs was to a man with a gun. And, not to be too graphic or anything like that, but I think with our audience, we can share this. But the guy ended up, shooting himself literally right in front of me. I was probably about 6 feet away from him. So the gunshot, the ringing in the ears, the surreal nature, the slow motion effect of everything, and just the amount of blood was just overwhelming. I mean, I'd never in my life thought, it's like, it's probably like on TV. It was nothing like on TV. It was completely different. And then there was another time early on, still in field training, where I had a guy knock another guy's eyeball out with a bedpost. And his eyeball was literally laying on the ground. And I remember the guy that was training me walking up, and he was like, we better recon that eyeball. They may be able to put it back in. And he walks up and pulls out a handkerchief and literally picks the guy's eyeball up. And I remember thinking, man, this is police work. So you see the worst of it. I'm sure you've seen plenty of nasty things before yourself. You've worked many years, so you just don't forget that, do you?
No, not at all. I was a rookie police officer. I'm Deet Nipes. I'm working in the White Rock area, and a multiple fatality accident comes out downtown Dallas. My FTO says, "Come on, rookie, we're going to go see some dead bodies." And he's thinking that he's going to get me all spun up and weirded out. And what he did not know is that when I was an intern at LSU, I actually worked for the DA's office and the ME's office. So I was familiar with dead bodies in a criminal perspective. So we get downtown Dallas, and a guy and his girlfriend on a motorcycle loses control. He hits the guardrail, decapitates him. His head goes to the lower level on Good Latimer. Her body goes flying over to the eastbound I-30 section of the highway, and body parts from just east of downtown all the way past Fair Park and even further than that. So we get there, and the ME is collecting body parts. My FTO says, hey, go downstairs to the lower level on Good Latimer, and I'm helping the ME out. I'm holding a flashlight while he's picking up body parts, and all of a sudden I realize he's putting 3 arms into one body bag, and I said something to him, and he looks up at me and says, what's your badge number, rookie? And I told him, and he said, we only have one body bag for this, so we're putting all the parts in one bag. I'm like, oh, cool. And then he picked up the guy's degloved scalp, his skull separated from his entire scalp, and he picked it up. And I remember to this day, it looked like a Halloween costume mask, complete with hair and everything about it.
Yep. I can relate in so many different ways. Anyway, we could probably actually make an entire show out of just like what kind of, crazy things have you seen before. I remember walking up on a small plane crash one time, and I thought, well, I could see the burned out wreckage of the plane, what was left of it. And it was just like a small job, little, one or two people kind of, I don't even know what you call those things, but just a small airplane. And it had crashed. And as I'm looking at the wreckage, I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. The guy made it out because there's no body in the plane. And so I'm standing there talking to the other officers, and I said, wow, at least the pilot, I guess, is lucky. Did they take him to the hospital or what? And they're like, no, you're about to step on him. Well, what I thought was a trash bag on the ground next to me, a black trash bag that somebody had left out in this field, was actually the burned remains of the pilot. He had been ejected on fire from the plane, and his body had, fully combusted right there on the ground. I thought it was a trash bag. I literally had no idea that I was standing right next to what was left of the pilot of this airplane. Stuff like that happens all the time. And the thing is, we can sit here and talk about it right now. It literally doesn't even faze us. I mean, that's the sad part. So the reality for the rest of the world is that that's what we see as police officers. And that stuff stays with us. It may not affect us in the here and the now. We may not be, like all broken up about it or whatever, because you develop this kind of this hard surface that just doesn't allow stuff to affect you like that. But the reality is it's still there. We are human beings. We still have emotions, and sometimes certain things can affect you and bring that stuff out. Does anything ever get to you? Do you ever have a moment where you're like, man, that reminds me of this or that or something, and it just really kind of rattles you a little bit or takes you back to something that wasn't particularly great in the past?
Absolutely. And in 1986, Gary Blair, who was a Dallas police officer, was killed in North Oak Cliff on a traffic stop. At the time, Gary was roommates with my then FTO. And to this day, for all the surgeries that I've had, 22 surgeries over my lifetime and 5 concussions, unless I get the anesthesiologist on board with my coming out of surgery, I still reflect on the death, the murder of Gary Blair, as if I were there, because I had seen him the night before at Lou Sterrett County Jail. We had talked, pleasantries, asked me how it was going, rookie, busted my chops, and then the next day, he's dead.
Right. Yep.
I still relive that. So I think most of us do relive the good and the bad, and we want to block out the bad and just recall and remark on the good.
Okay, you ready? I'm going to pick up right there. Check. So in my particular case, I had a head-on collision in a squad car. And it was like a 60-mile-an-hour impact, ejected me from the vehicle, did some head damage. And that's part of my excuse for why I am how I am today, because of the head trauma. But so that experience, for a while after that, any loud crashing noise or anytime anything would happen, there was a time when another accident happened just in front of me in an intersection, and I got to experience that. That took me back for a few minutes. And there was a commercial on TV at the time that would run all the time, and they were selling insurance and stuff, and it would have these people who were driving down the road in a car, and all of a sudden everything's peaceful and quiet and calm, and then boom, a semi would nail the car. and it had high shock value, and it made a lot of sense for them selling the insurance. But every single time that commercial came on, it would literally send me into about a 5-minute tailspin. Heart rate would go up, anxiety level would come up, and it would take me a second to decelerate myself and get myself back to okay. Now, I don't have to deal with that today. Luckily, that's kind of all past, and it was to be expected, right after that critical incident happened. But that's what people need to be aware of. If you have a cop in your life, or if you're around someone who used to be a cop, don't you need to be mindful of stuff like that? And don't just accept the fact that on the outside, they're a hard shell. Oh, they're good. They handle all that stuff. You need to be mindful that something could set them back or bring back an unpleasant memory or, heck, anything. It's just the fact that we're human beings still. And this stuff is rough. So essentially, there's not hardly any other occupation out there. I mean, firefighters, they certainly gear up. They go into their day knowing that they may be, in a burning house or dealing with some sort of a chemical or something like that. So that's a pretty close deal. But most firemen probably don't have to worry about getting shot. Typically, I would assume that that's probably the case. I'm not trying to, because I wouldn't do half the stuff that they do. That's why, God invented special people for firemen. But there's probably not too many more professions where you actually gear up at the beginning of your day, going into your day, wearing body armor, armed with 1 to 2 different handguns, weapons, knowing full well that you may engage this day in literal battle, and you may or may not come home. So, you have a job and you're, working at a restaurant or you're doing retail. That's stressful. I mean, no job is ever easy or fun, but isn't it different though when you're in law enforcement? Isn't it just maybe a little more crazy?
Without a doubt. And I remember somebody telling me years ago that everybody loves the fireman and everybody loves the postman. These days, I think everyone hates them as well because they're in uniform. They work for the government or an entity.
Wow, that's an interesting take.
But police officers, there's just a complete lack of respect. I believe that officer-involved shooting or a fatal shooting out in California last week, the police show up. They set an inner perimeter to keep the crowd back, and the crowd is telling the police that they can step over the line, the wire. They can go into the crime scene where it was still active, and just a complete disregard and disrespect for law enforcement.
So the whole world's changed, and because the world has changed, law enforcement has changed. The job's, like I think we touched on this a little bit in the last episode, the job has changed. It's no longer it was never a safe job, but it's not even as safe as it once was, because there's no respect, like you said. And if you have no respect, then maybe you feel a little more inclined to go ahead and throw down with this cop that just pulled you over. Maybe you're gonna, roadside lawyer the situation. Maybe you think whatever because you watch YouTube or you watch whatever and you learned all these things and you get inspired. One of the things that just really, really gets me right now is some of the anti-cop movements that are out there. And I mean, they're outright like that. So they have names that kind of make it very clear that they are watching the cops, that they're anti-cop and all that stuff. So that stuff gets out, it goes viral, and it creates a situation where a lot of, especially these younger people, they already don't have a lot of respect because they've not been, raised like maybe you and I were. And now they're pulled over by someone who's in authority, and they don't show respect there either. And it can get deadly. It can escalate into a very bad situation quickly.
Well, even the comedian Chris Rock had that video spoof on what to do or what not to do when the police pull you over or the po-po pulls you over. Even Chris Rock's funny take on that has some validity to it. But just like you said, these anti-police groups, and there are numerous ones out there, they're all roadside attorneys. They all know the law, and no police officer wants to deal with that. Look, I'm not pulling you over because you're doing a 37 and 35. You're doing 57 and a 35. Your car's out of the wrong neighborhood or in the wrong neighborhood. You've got vehicle equipment issues, maintenance issues. I saw you leaving at a high rate of speed, or there was a robbery and your car fitted. I'm doing my job, and now this person has a complete disrespect for the uniform, for the police officer, just makes it even harder.
Well, I think it's interesting that how many times did you probably ever hear this when you pull someone over and automatically, right when you don't even know who's driving the car. You don't know if they're green, purple, red, blue, black, white, orange, or indifferent. You don't know. But automatically when you walk up, hey, you just stopped me because I'm, and then fill in the blank with whatever the deal of the day is. And you're like, no, actually I stopped you because you're going 74 and a 45. I literally do not know nor care as I'm stopping you what your race is, what your sex is, what your, how you, anything. I could care less. I care that you are operating this vehicle well in excess of the speed limit. That's why I stopped you. But the mentality is out there that, you know, you're out there and you've got some ulterior motive or other agenda or something like that. And certainly I'm not saying that doesn't ever exist, because it has. You know, again, human beings, and they bring some of their stuff, and every once in a while there's a bad apple. But by and large, that's not the case. You don't go to pull someone over because of whatever they have, don't have, the color of their skin, what sex. You don't care about that stuff. You're out there to do a job. And we're getting a little bit away from the point, but the point is that everything's changed. And kind of like you said early on, once a cop, always a cop. You're always on the job. In this particular case, you're prepared every single day to go out there and deal with just this kind of stuff. You literally get out there and constantly have to deal with this ever-changing world, this lack of respect, these anti-cop groups, all that stuff. So it's just a nonstop thing. So, you know, once you're out of law enforcement, let's touch on this, because I think part of the article was the fact that, you know, all these things exist. But I'm curious, when you get out of law enforcement and you retire like you or like I, do you foresee moving forward through our years, do you see that it's going to change much for us? Is your mindset probably always going to say like this? Do you want to move away from it? Do you want to push all the cop stuff out of your life and just become an average citizen?
I think that's where I've surprised my teammates and my battle buddies who have asked what I'm doing now that I've retired. And when they find out that I've transitioned from law enforcement to mergers and acquisitions, they ask me how that transition really took place. And first and foremost, I tell them it was a blessing from a church brother of mine. But it really was an easy transition, because I went from negotiating at gunpoint, if you will, for 33 years, to now negotiating at talking points with clients and business owners.
So just for a little bit of backup so that everybody understands exactly what you're saying, you came from municipal police department to federal level. You served plenty of years doing both of those, and then you've rolled out of that, and now you're in the civilian job market, or in the civilian sector, I should say. You have a position where you explain to me exactly what you do. It's you're brokering deals in the purchase and sell of businesses. Is that, am I saying that right?
Yes. Mergers and acquisitions is just that. We sell businesses for clients that are looking to sell their businesses.
Okay, and you were able to bring with you a lot of the negotiating skills and some of those things from law enforcement into what you're doing now. So the question of whether or not you ever want to get away from it, you really don't want to get away from it, because it helps you do what you're doing right now. It's going to help you with the job that you have right now. Like you said, you're still negotiating, just not at gunpoint, thankfully. I'm assuming you don't have to wear body armor every day when you go to work now?
No body armor, but the owner of the firm will ask me when we go to lunch, hey, are you packing? And
right.
I'm like, well, aren't you? And he's not,
right.
But one or two of us usually is, and I always am. It's just in my background, and it's not something that will leave me, much like your neighbor that you were talking about earlier.
Right.
And I think that's a good intro to, you know, even what the military retiree sees. He still has that mindset.
Right. So I've got a neighbor, and interesting little side note here. I've got a neighbor who I've watched walk past my house many times. He's probably in his, I'm going to guess he's at the very end of the 70s or in the first half of the 80s in age. And he's always out there walking like a really cute little, you know, miniature Dachshund dog. And yeah, it just seems like just a super nice guy. He stopped by and talked a couple of times, and just really, really, really great guy to talk to. I know nothing about him beyond that. One day, a young man comes over and is talking to me about my car. I happen to have an old 1970 vehicle, muscle car sitting out front. He comes to talk to me about that. Turns out this kid, his father is the one who I see walking by all the time with the dog. And through a little bit of conversation, I've learned that the older gentleman is actually retired law enforcement with quite a vivid history. And so after doing a little bit of research myself, one day I happened to be doing my walk through the neighborhood, and as I walked past the gentleman's house, he was outside, and I thought, I'm going to take this opportunity to walk up and shake his hand. And so I walked up, shook his hand, explained that I'm former law enforcement, and he said, it was good to know me, and I said, I hear you're former law enforcement. He's like, I sure am, and we talked a little bit about all that. But let me just tell you, in talking to him, even though, like I'm saying, he's around 80 now, give or take 5 years, the old cop still came out in him. It was the coolest thing ever. I mean,
Yeah, definitely.
I literally could see reflections of myself in him talking about the good old days, how things used to be, and how the world is now and everything. I mean, he literally is still police, even at his age, even walking the little miniature dash hound, even, barely able to maybe move down the street as well as he once would. Used to maybe kick in doors and that kind of stuff. And now, he's doing good to probably tie his shoes. But I think that's awesome. I think that's fantastic. So, and I do believe that, once a cop, always a cop. It's never going to leave us. And I know for a fact that I don't want all this stuff to leave me.
I'm fortunate that I'm on a Facebook page that is composed of retirees from where I work. And to hear the old heads talk and speak proudly of our profession when it was our profession, but those stories, along with the die-heartedness of all of them, much like your neighbor walking the dog, it stays in us. Some pursue it a little bit more. Some get away from it. Some completely forget it altogether. Mm-hmm. But it's who we were. And, like I said, for 33 years, I carried a gun. That's more than half of my adult life, half of my life, period.
So you think you'll make another 33 still carrying a gun?
I might get to the point where it won't fit my waistband or my ankle holster.
That's my problem now. That's what happens with me. I can't find a good IWB, type holster for people that don't know what that inside the waistband holster, because you get a little older, you slow down. I've put on the weight. I've got
you have a bigger waistband, so you have more areas to.
I could actually probably put a high caliber rifle, maybe a couple of handguns, and definitely a fixed blade knife in there.
That reminds me of a video where a guy is wearing a baggy shirt and baggy jeans, and he must have broke out 20 guns that were concealed everywhere and anywhere in his person, and just looking at him, you would have never known it.
That's awesome.
Abby. I have an auto tuner on here if you want it. Abby. Okay. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break and cut to one of our sponsors who is actually bringing this great episode to you, and we will be back on the other side. It's going good.
Bueno good.
Yeah.
Where are you going?
Killing the recording.